Hello, it's Jeremy. As you know, my channel is dedicated to defending hated movies that I really enjoy. Well, today, I'm going to do the exact opposite. Berate a film I hate that most people seem to really like. A little film named Fresh. Fresh is a 2022 comedic horror thriller directed by Mimi Cave in her directorial debut. I saw this film on February 28th at my college's theater, and while I liked being at the theater with a bunch of fellow media arts students, I freaking hated this movie. But why? Well, before we talk about that, let's establish the plot and what I liked about the film. Fresh is about a woman named Noah, played by Daisy Edgar Jones. Noah is trying to get a date, but nothing seems to work, until she meets Steve, played by Sebastian Stan, at a grocery store. They hit it off, and Steve offers for the two of them to go to his house. This turns out to be bad, as Steve drugs Noah, and when Noah wakes up, she's chained to a bed, and Steve reveals that he sells human meat on the black market and plans to cut up Noah's meat. Okay, so here's what I liked about Fresh. The first half is really good. It's a very clever send-up of rom-com tropes that's really well acted and not too on the nose. There's a character named Chad, played by Brett Deer, and he's pretty funny. He feels like a character from a slasher film or a Final Destination movie that just happened to intersect with this movie. Incredibly pretentious, rude, and condescending, yep, still pretty enjoyable. Chad is the kind of character you love to hate. Also, Daisy Edgar Jones and Sebastian Stan have great chemistry. Both actors work really well together, and I wouldn't mind seeing them together in another project. Molly is also a really good character. She's Noah's best friend, and not only does Jonica T. Gibbs do a good job in the role, but Molly has really good lines, works well off Noah, and her subplot worked really well with the story. And the cinematography is great. There are some hiccups I have with it, which I'll discuss later, but for the most part, Fresh is really well shot. There are some moments where the film is really cool, and that's coming from someone who doesn't notice cinematography that much. Also, the opening credits are really cool. The choice to have the opening credits where the horror starts is really clever, the music is nice, and I love the retro font. It makes the credits look visually distinct. Not on the level of films like Biodome and Drop Dead Fred, but a cool opening credits sequence nonetheless. And for the most part, that's it. Well, there is one more thing, but I can't talk about it until we talk about the bad stuff. Buckle up, because here we go. There are two main problems with Fresh. It takes itself way too seriously, and it tries too hard to be artsy and weird. Let's start with the first problem. Now, there are two ways to do a horror comedy. The first is to all but completely eliminate the horror and just use it as a set piece for comedy. And the second is to have an equal balance of horror and comedy, with there being a lot of scary elements, but it takes itself less seriously than a traditional horror film, and there are some comedic moments thrown in. Fresh is clearly trying to go for the second way, which on its own is perfectly fine. The problem is that, in my opinion, it doesn't do a good job of balancing the horror and comedy. While there are some moments of humor, most of the film focuses on Noah and her being chained up and tortured, which distracts from the comedic elements and makes the film feel uneven. Compare this with something like the woman in the house across the street from the girl in the window. Unlike Fresh, the woman perfectly balances both horror and comedy. There's equal time given to both the jokes and the scary atmosphere, meaning you're able to feel both. But Fresh focuses too much on the horror and not enough on the comedy. I wasn't expecting something like terror vision, but I think the film would have been stronger if it focused more on the absurdity of the cannibalism and less on the ramifications of Noah and the other girls being tortured. Then there's the fact that the film tries way too hard to be artsy and weird. Many people have praised the cinematography for this film, and I agree, this film is really well shot, as I mentioned earlier. But at the same time, there are certain scenes that try way too hard to make this film seem more artsy and creative than it is. For example, in one scene of Noah and Steve interacting, you can see them dancing in a weird way, and I felt so much try-hard energy from that moment. I am a weird media connoisseur, from recognizable and well-known to stiff odds levels of obscure. And what makes the good weird media work is how it's weird not to impress the audience, but just because it's weird. Stuff like 12 Ounce Mouse, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, and Noel Fielding's luxury comedy are weird regardless of what the audience thinks. If they like it, great, but if not, they can just leave. And while Fresh isn't meant to be as weird as those examples, it feels like a lot of Fresh's weird moments are meant more to make the film appear more interesting rather than to genuinely be weird and amusing. And while there are multiple other problems with the film, like the uneven tone, too much intensity, a lack of moral center, and its lack of embracing comedy, most of these and other problems stem from how the film tries too hard to be serious and artsy. But remember earlier when I said there was one thing that I liked but didn't mention yet? Here's where that comes into play. While there are some things in the second half that are alright, like Molly's subplot, Steve is easily the best part of the second half. Unlike Noah, who gradually gets worse as the film goes on, Steve gradually gets better. Not only is the chemistry between Daisy and Sebastian still really good, but Sebastian really brings his A game. His scenes give this film a dash of absurdism it so desperately needs. Steve acts incredibly chill and casual, being fully aware of how horrible what he's doing is, yet, despite still caring for Noah, really doesn't care about the ethical ramification of what he's doing, and does things like slice up human limbs while listening to music and having a casual conversation with Noah while he's removing her butt. It's a really great performance that makes me want to see Sebastian Stan appear in more horror comedies, as he really has a knack for this kind of stuff. If the film just embraced Steve's lunacy and went in a direction similar to the 1980 horror comedy Motel Hell, this could have been alright. But no, we have to focus on Noah and all the other people being locked up, and the messed up dynamic between Steve and Noah, and having ugly, intense scenes. And I'm not saying that Noah should have died. She didn't deserve any of this. I'm just saying that the film should have embraced the absurdity of its premise instead of focusing on these darker elements. So yeah, I don't like Fresh. It's not completely without its merits, but in a way, that makes it worse. A film with no redeeming elements is certainly a torturous experience, but a film with a few really good elements that's overall really bad comes with the sting of disappointment. There are great things in this movie. The first half is solid, the opening credits are creative, the premise on its own isn't terrible, Molly is an alright character and her subplot is decently executed, the acting is really good from everybody, there's not a single bad performance in this movie, and like I said, the film is shot really well. But those two massive problems I brought up earlier drag all those good elements down. I'm probably in the minority on this film, as everyone else I came across seems to eat it up, but Fresh was an absolute chore to sit through, which is really disappointing as there was a lot going for it. I really hope Daisy Edgar Jones and Sebastian Stan appear in more movies together, and that Mimi Cave continues to improve, but as a directorial debut, Fresh is undeniably rotten. But enough about my thoughts. What did you guys think? Did you agree with me and think that Fresh was a disappointment, or do you disagree and think that it's one of the best films of the year? And for those who haven't seen the film, I'd like to make one thing clear. Don't let this video stop you from seeing Fresh. Despite my harsh criticisms towards the film, I am 100% open to other people watching Fresh and forming their own opinion. It's nice to see people find joy in things I hate, and who knows, you might like it more than I did. Anyways, that's all for now. Stay tuned for more episodes of Jeremy U's reviews when I make them, and see ya.